Last year I recorded a video where I analysed my own stroke, and there's a couple of things that came out of it where I've been working on them for the last 12 months. So I've now got an updated video from those couple of things that I was working on 12 months ago. Now this footage was recorded at our Thailand swim camps, our Hell Week swim camps over there. And the footage previous was recorded at the same camp, but a year before it. So it's basically 12 months in 12 months difference there. So the first footage was this one here, which you might have seen in the previous video. One of the things that I was working on was getting rid of the crossover. So both hands were crossing into the center a little too much. Particularly you can see that left one just coming into the center. And then the right hand, same thing, was just crossing over a bit too much. So what that was causing in front was the hand just to stay up a little too high for a little too long, and what we sort of call putting the brakes on, or just creating extra drag on the forearm there. So ideally, we want to try and get this hand down to about shoulder depth or underarm depth, and then we really reduce the drag, and that puts us in a much more efficient position. So mostly because of that crossover, my hands were staying too high for too long, and the drag was just more than what it needed to be. So that was one of the first things I worked on, and you can see in this footage here, for the most part, I'm on those train tracks. If we imagine train tracks running in line with the shoulder, and we want to enter there and extend straight forward. So for the most part, hands are entering on those train tracks, much better line through there as opposed from the crossover. Now, I don't mind if you get close to the center, we just really want to try and avoid actually crossing the center line. So with both arms, it's pretty much there. Sometimes on the breathing stroke, it does come across a little bit too much. So I could go a bit wider there, but for the most part, it's where we should be. Now, in order to change it, I had to make it feel substantially wider than what would feel comfortable for about 3 weeks. That's how long it took to make it feel sort of normal and comfortable. But like anything out in front of the head, anything that happens out here, you usually need to exaggerate it to change it, because if you try and change it a little bit, it doesn't really happen. So knowing that, I just made it feel like I was super wide for a couple of weeks, and I still need to make it feel fairly wide in order to keep it there. But it's a much, much better position, because as you can see, the depth of the hands now is a lot better. So it doesn't stay up, play it here from the beginning, it doesn't stay up anything like it was before. So you can see that right hand pretty much straight away gets to that shoulder depth. Left one, same thing, pretty much getting there straight away now. And it's really just because of that, getting rid of that crossover. So if you know that your hands do come up and you put the brakes on, just check if you are crossing over, because that's often that's the most common cause, or one of the most common causes that we see causing you to put the brakes on there. So that was the first thing. The other thing that I was doing was on my right hand side, on quite a few strokes, I was pressing down, my left arm, I was drifting down with my hand and keeping it too straight for too long. So I was sort of missing the first part of the catch here. I'll show you in this video. On a lot of strokes, this was happening. So you can see how the arm stays pretty much straight. It was pressing down. I only really started to get the catch, sort of getting it here. But even then, you can just see how the hand was sweeping under the body and not in a great position there. It wasn't every stroke, but particularly on those breathing strokes, that was happening. And I'll play it through a bit more. So yeah, on a lot of these strokes, it was really just drifting down, and I was not getting much out of that left arm on a lot of strokes here. Now, part of that was because I was over-rotating through my shoulders and taking too long to get the breath here. So you'll see how my head's kind of hanging out for a while, eventually turn it back there, but it's a little bit of like a delayed, bit of a pause there. So if you look at the breathing there, just taking too long. And so that was a big cause of why this arm was just sort of drifting downwards, missing part of the catch. Now, it's not the worst thing that can happen in the stroke. Like it's not slowing me down too much, but there's a lot more propulsion available there by improving it. So that was one thing that I worked on, was just knowing that I was over-rotating on that side. And so I tried to reduce that rotation a little bit and starting to get that catch a little bit earlier. And you can see how that's a much better position to then be in. So I'm starting to set up the catch a lot better here. So more surface area with the forearm and the hand compared to what it was. And I've been able to improve that quite a bit. And I've noticed a good improvement in the speed from that as well. The other thing that's helped with that is I've been working on not trying to overpower the stroke. So you can actually go a lot faster when you're swimming if you're just trying to maximize the contact time with the water. So think of that as your hand and your forearm, keeping that pressing back against the water and not looking to rush it at any stage. So if there's any point where you sort of slip through the water, then you've lost that pressure, you've lost that contact time, and it's actually going to be slower than if you just gradually build up the speed and accelerate through the stroke there. So you can see it here coming through, just not trying to really muscle your way through it. And that's one thing that we worked on a lot with the swimmers at Hell Week, was that just maintain that contact time. You're going to be a lot faster than trying to pull a lot faster, where people just always end up slipping there. So that was one of the major things. And the other thing that I was sort of working on as well, my right wrist had a tendency to bend a bit too much. You can see how much the wrist bends. Now it's okay to have a little bit of a bend there to sort of initiate the catch. It's not too bad, but too much wrist bend here. It starts to straighten out here, which is good, and that's a good position, but it was a bit too much wrist bend for a bit too long. So I was trying to just keep that forearm and hand together as it moves through the catch. And you can see here on this stroke, and we'll just get a better shot of it. See how that's a lot better there, where the wrist doesn't really bend as much at all. Now still probably a bit too much here, but once I get to that sort of press phase or the starting the pull, it's together, which is the main thing there. So that's started to improve quite a bit. Now, in terms of how this has impacted my speed, over the last couple of weeks, I like to sort of repeat sets, and those couple of things have really helped me be able to sustain a faster pace for longer. So it's a little bit less effort, and the speed has been a bit faster than usual. So there's a set that I normally like to do. It's 6 200s, and I used to do 6 200s leaving on 235, and last year around January I did 6 200s leaving on 230, coming in on 220, and just recently, just the other week, I went 10 of those on 230, coming in on 220. So I was able to sort of hold that pace a lot easier, and a big part of that was just the change in technique. So that's certainly made a difference. Now, a couple of things that I noticed here that I've been working on since as well, I think there's a little too much sort of compression through the spine here on a few of these strokes. So I have this tendency to have quite a loping stroke, especially in this one here. It's probably more evident in this one, where after I take some strokes, I tend to sort of compress my chest a bit here, and the eyes were coming up. Now, again, it's not a major thing, but I was just finding that I was getting a little bit stuck under the water, and it was impacting my recovery. So what I've been working on lately after watching these videos is just not trying to sort of sink my chest down too much through here, just basically trying to keep the shoulders out of the water a little bit more, and not push the chest down and have too much of an arch through the upper back there. And just practicing that in the last couple of days, it's been feeling pretty good. So it's something that I'm just going to continue to experiment with. Now, the other thing that I've been working on is the recovery. So in the recovery, one of the things that I've probably come to do a bit more of since I've been open water swimming for the last, roughly mostly 10 years. I used to be pool swimming primarily, where I had a sort of higher elbow recovery and so on. Over the last 10 years, I've come to much more of a straighter arm recovery. And I think a straight arm recovery can be very good for open water. But I've been leaning towards too much of a hand-led recovery, where the hand sort of leads the elbow through this part of the stroke. Whereas what we want to try and do instead is have the elbow lead the way a bit more. So if we were to look from above here, what we'd want to see generally is we want to keep that elbow in front of the hand until about halfway here, which you're seeing here, and that's because I was practicing it here. But usually, and you might even see it in this one, the hand has a tendency to sort of lead the way. So the hand swings in front of the elbow just a bit too early on in the stroke. And speaking to one of our coaches, Gary Hurring from New Zealand, ex-Olympic swimmer and Olympic coach, he talks about you want to lead with the elbow, so the elbow stays in front of the hand up until about here, because he feels like it gives you just a little bit more load on the shoulder and on this arm out in front when you do that. Whereas if the hand swings in front, then it just kind of puts the shoulders in a position where you can't quite get as much out of the stroke out in front there. And I think that's pretty accurate. You know, I think that's a big reason why you'd look to make that change. So that's one of the things I've been working on. And in this shot here, I was coming over the water quite wide, quite straight. This is kind of how I'd normally race open water. And what I'm just going to play around with a little bit is to come or work towards a slightly more elbow-led recovery, where the elbow stays in front of the hand a little bit longer. So, you know, I don't mind a higher hand recovery on one side. It's pretty common, especially for open water. But it's really just that right hand that was probably swinging around a little bit too low, and the elbow wasn't quite leading the way. So that's kind of one of the next things that I'm looking to work on. Now in this video here, this was just a push 100, where it felt at about sort of 80%, 85%. It was 110 pace, long course there. But the thing was, my stroke rate here is 64 strokes per minute. And that's not what I would do if I was racing. If I'm racing open water, I'm going to be around 75 strokes a minute. So this is actually, it's like, you know, we use the analogy of gears. Imagine you've got 5 gears, and you're thinking like a bike. This is kind of like the big gear. This is the 5th gear, where I'm putting in quite a bit of force, quite a bit of power in order to drive that gear around. But it can be quite a bit more tiring. Whereas if you shift down to 4th gear, you can just keep the legs spinning over, or in this case, you know, the arms and the strokes ticking over. So here I'm around, in this shot here, I'm around 75, 76 strokes per minute. And that's closer to what I do when I'm racing open water. So the pace is about the same in these two, but this is actually a bit more sustainable for me when it comes to open water swimming, because while this one looks a lot easier and the stroke rate is lower, I'm having to put in a bit more power in order to hold that sort of time and that pace. So what I'd be looking to do, I'd train this sort of 5th gear, because it helps to train those big and powerful strokes. It helps to train that way, but you also want to be able to sort of shift down gears to that 4th gear instead of the 5th gear. So when it does come to doing a set where you might be, you know, 2Ks, 3K main set, it can help to be able to sit in that 4th gear and just sort of comfortably keep it ticking over. So when I'm doing a longer distance set where I'm looking to sort of practice race pace, I'll actually do it with this sort of speed, with this sort of, you know, mid-70s sort of stroke rate. But if I'm doing anything where it's a bit more of a controlled effort, or I'm sort of descending in effort, I'll try and keep the stroke rate that little bit lower, and just work on that distance per stroke. So it's good to be able to do the two. And I just want to make that distinction there, because it does make a difference being able to sit at that lower stroke count and sort of slower stroke rate, because that's a great way to know that your technique is really good. But it means when you're racing, you'll probably start to increase the rating a little bit, and you'll just work more with your rhythm and your timing, and just sort of have a bit less power through each of those strokes there. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If let me know what you're working on in your own stroke in the comments below. I'm always curious as to hear what people are working on. And I know that I talk a lot about you know, all the different things that you can work on in your stroke, but keep it simple. For me, I'm really working on one thing at a time, sometimes two, but usually just one thing at a time. And even sort of being a coach and working on this stuff full time, it's very hard to do more than 2 things at once. So just keep it really simple. And I'm curious as to what are you working on. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week. Please like and subscribe if you did enjoy this video, and I'll see you soon.